to this computer. I think it's recording. Recording, yes, it says there. Right, and now I'm opening the slideshow. Hopefully it will. Okay, here we are. So, if you remember, 2 weeks before I went.
Slideshow's not open.
It's not open. Slideshow. Is the share screen. Sorry, share screen. I share. And now, can you see it? Slideshow. I think you should see it now.
Yep.
Right. So we talked a bit about language and how language, of course, is how we communicate and how we convince others of our ideas and our impressions and beliefs. And today we are going to talk about the misuses of language, and this will be the theme for the next 4 lessons. And we are going to focus essentially on language designed to impress. So usually the purposes of the discourse are when you want to influence people. They are designed to impress, they are designed to influence, or they are designed to confuse. Okay? Of course, there are also language that is designed just because you want to communicate and pass on a message, like writing, poetry, and it doesn't fall in any of these categories. But these are the categories that are important for us as critical thinkers to protect ourselves from being convinced by theories and that we don't want to accept. So, what we are going to talk about in language designed to impress are these types of language: affected language, pretentious, pompous. I'm going to give you some examples. And then on the following lessons, we will focus on language designed to influence. And then I'm going to teach you a bit about rhetoric, the history of rhetoric, how did it start, what is sophistry, because the word rhetoric nowadays has a negative, what's the word, sort of connotation, yeah. And then we are going to talk about rhetorical devices, that is what systems they use to convince people, and you will see them used constantly by politicians. Okay, so let's start with language designed to impress. Here is the list of languages that we are going to talk about. The first thing that we need to avoid is wordiness. What is wordiness? Is using more words than necessary to express the ideas the sentence contains. You can see a lot of this in the humanities, where people doing science, they are constantly being hit in the hands to shorten, to remove words, to make it simple. And we in science, we use the KISS rule, that is, keep it simple, stupid. Okay? So your scientists remember. Look at this example. This essay will explore several different theories that have been developed by paleontologists for attempting to explain why dinosaurs reached the point of becoming extinct. Could you simplify this? Don't you think that this has a lot of words that we could actually get rid of? And we foreigners, when we're writing science for the first time, we do this mistake a lot of time because we translate directly from our mother tongues. So look at this. The first half is not bad, says the author that wrote this the stuff that I put on this PowerPoint. But the second, it says, reach the point of becoming extinct. This could be reduced simply to became extinct. Okay? So the sentence could somehow be revised as, this essay will explore several different theories, even several different. You can just say several. If there's several, they may be different. So even these two words are necessary together. And so This essay will explore several theories paleontologists have developed to explain why dinosaurs became extinct. It's much clearer now, it's clean. Okay? Even some teachers, they really don't want you to write this essay will explore, because it's already implied that you are exploring. I explore. But this is also because in science in the old days, we were taught never to use the word I, and always to use the word we. And now this is also about fashion. Okay, now they say, if you did the experiment, you say I, if nobody else was there. If it is your theory, you say I. So different authors have different ideas. Look at this one, and let's read it aloud, and then you are going to tell me how you would simplify it. In 1916, the disease of polio reached epidemic proportions when 27,363 cases of polio were reported by healthcare workers in America, and more than 7,000 people died of polio as a result in the worst outbreak of polio in the history of the country. It is a mouthful. I have to stop to get some air. Now, suggestions to simplify this.
Take out the disease. It's just polio.
Good. What else?
In 27,363 cases, you don't have to have of polio again.
Yes, so the repetition of the word polio. The suggestion then is, how would we make it more concise? Could you say it aloud? Tell me that story about the polio. So in your own
Freezing,
word.
Anna.
Am I freezing? What about now? Is it okay? Yes. Okay, so how would we do that? So these are actually the problem words. The disease of, as Paul said, polio. So there's a lot of use polio. This is unnecessary. Okay? So we can just reduce it to, in 1916, American healthcare workers reported 27,363 cases of polio and over 1,000 deaths, 7,000 deaths in the country, in the country's worst polio epidemic. Even if depends what we are writing to. If this is to science, this should be specific. But if we are writing to a newspaper, it's not really important that it's 363. You could just say over 27,000, okay? Or around 27,000. And you just round it up. Who's going to remember 363? So it also depends who you are writing to. So that is what verbosity is trying to cut it down, the words. There is
Sorry,
another.
Anna, if you just went back one, if you were being more scientific, that, as you said, you wouldn't put 27,363 cases. It's probably, as you said, 27,000.
You round it up and under or above if it's 500. Now, unless they are doing statistics, they need the exact numbers. If you're just giving general information, you don't need to go to that level of detail. Now, the other thing that I found in this book, this is a very interesting book that is writing for science. There is another thing called pedantic verbosity. It's when the text contains words that are uncommon to the reading audience, at which the text is aimed. So the reading audience, actually, even the book didn't need at which the text is aimed, because it's to the audience is already saying, I should cut this. And rightly understood synonym, and if you have a synonym that is available and is understood for more people than your specialist people, then you should use that synonym. And one of the things that really irritates me, for example, is in philosophy writing, uses words like, this text explicates the way. I understand what explicates means, because in Portuguese we say explicar, but in English it explains, the most general word. Why shouldn't we use explain rather than explicate? Okay? Unless there is a difference between explain and explicate, then it makes sense. No.
I don't think explicate exists as a word.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Explicate exists.
But what is the difference, Peter? You studied philosophy, help us.
Well, no, briefly, don't exaggerate. Well, explicate exists, but it's just another word for explain. I mean, it's silly.
Yeah, it's just a pedantic
Yes,
word.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it does exist.
Yes. Yeah, it does exist.
For people that do crosswords, it exists.
Yes. But for the general public, in English, they would say explain. They wouldn't say explicate.
But you can use, Peter, can't you use explicate in a different context? If you explicate yourself from that difficult situation, you're getting out of it. It's a different word.
I think that's extricate.
Extricate. That's extricate, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so here are some examples. Why would people use pedantic verbosity? Here are other examples. The word use very often.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said, okay, I can leave. A narrow, often tiresome focus on or display of learning,
sorry.
and especially its trivial aspects. So that's what verbosity is. So pedantic writing style, an academic insistent on precision, a bookish vocabulary, intellectual refinement of speech, scholastic and excessively subtle reasoning. That's when a lot of this verbosity is used, when you are actually splitting hairs when you're writing. Here are some examples of simple language and its equivalent in verbose language. In simple, we say use, and verbose is utilize. In simple, we say do, and verbose, they use perform. Start, initiate, end, finalize, terminate, okay. Make, fabricate, explain, explicate. First, last, initial, ultimate. Before, prior to. After, subsequent to. I mean, there's even longer words. Prohibit, militate against. Enough, sufficient. Too much, plethora. Although plethora you can use in another way. When you have, it doesn't mean always too much. It means a large variety of. Okay, so I have a plethora of drawings. It doesn't mean that they are too much. Now, at this point in time, how many times did you hear people in interviews and say, at this point in time, why don't they say just now or today? Drug, chemotherapeutic agent. So these are just examples of verbosity. And here is a story about verbosity and how it can actually be dangerous to use this language. A plumber who wrote to, this is an American story, who wrote to the Bureau of Standards, he said, I found hydrochloric acid good for cleaning out clogged drains. And the Bureau then wrote back and said, the efficacy of hydrochloric acid is indisputable, but the chlorine residue is incompatible with metallic permanence. And then he said, the plumber, that he was glad that the Bureau agreed with him. And the Bureau tried again and said, we cannot assume responsibility for the production of toxic and noxious residues with hydrochloric acid and suggested to use an alternate procedure. And the plumber said again, I'm glad that you agree with me. And finally, the Bureau said, don't use hydrochloric acid. It eats hell out of the pipes. So basically, that's what they've been trying to say with all these verbosity. Now, the other thing is jargon. Jargon, a definition of jargon, is technical terminology or a characteristic idiom of a special activity or group. Okay, and we use jargon in our specific jobs. But when we are talking to our colleagues, they understand the same jargon, and it's okay to use the jargon. It shows that we know the technical terms. But it can also be confused, unintelligible language, strange, outlandish, or barbarous language. So this comes from I think it's the Oxford Dictionary. I Googled the definition. And another definition for jargon is obscure and often pretentious language marked by circumlocutions and long words. So all the three types should be avoided if possible, okay, especially these two. However, this technical terminology is much more difficult to avoid, not only in scientific writing, but in economics or philosophy, engineering. But you assume that the people you are writing to understand the word, and you don't need to be defining it all the time. So that's what jargon is. A circumlocution is precisely this example at this point in time when you could say no. So it's make a simple concept much more complex by the use of many words. The other thing is euphemisms are also examples of circumlocutions. Okay? And the British are very good at euphemisms. And euphemisms, for those of you who are not British, it means that when you want to discuss something that you don't want to make direct reference, so you go around the subject, like for example, pushing up daisies means die, okay? But in Portuguese, we also have an euphemism similar to die, is making clay, okay? So it's under the earth and it's making clay. Here is another example of a circumlocution. In George Orwell's Animal Farm, you remember, if you read the book, that the pigs control the farm and then decide that they take over. And then Napoleon says, for the time being, it has been found necessary to make a readjustment of rations. And that means they have to eat more, if you remember, because they were the ones who were managing the farm and they needed more food. And again, readjustment of rations is a circumlocution that says we should have more than you. And so this is funny that I find for clear, concise communication, avoid circumlocution. So here is a bed, horizontal tranquility terminal, or rubber, misapplication elimination device, or this follicle redistribution mechanism. You and Keith don't really need a follicle redistribution mechanism, Paul, huh? But I think Peter would need one. Now, so this comes from a book that is very much against jargon, and they say, too often the jargon of scientific specialists is like political rhetoric and bureaucratic mumblespeak, ugly sounding, difficult to understand, and clumsy. Those who use it often do so because they prefer pretentious abstract words to simple concrete ones.
No, I disagree here. No, when you talk about scientists, there is a lot of scientific specialist words which are jargon, and they're not any of these things, I'm afraid.
Yes,
I believe.
yes. But what they say here, this sentence is not a generalization. It's just, it says too often. So it's perhaps more often that it would be required. Okay. Now, when we are looking, using that, as I said, in a specialized in-group, then it's okay. Also because it saves a lot of words. If each time I have to define evolution in a text about evolution, it will fill in like 10 words more than I am allowed to I have to count my words when I'm writing. This is again from that book, Writing Clearly and Concisely. And he says, I believe that every scientist should avoid jargon. Avoid it, not sometimes, avoid it all the time. And so sometimes it does make sense because we really have to use jargon. But if we are using jargon, remember we should always provide a definition in the beginning, especially if you are using acronyms, and define what the acronym, like for example, CBT, and you're going to talk about CBT across all your paper. But then in the first paragraph, you have to say cognitive behavior therapy, inside brackets, CBT. And then you can use CBT all the time. But very often I see papers just with acronyms and I haven't a clue what they mean. And they say, well, if you're reading this paper, maybe a specialist and you know what this acronym means.
Can I tell you a funny acronym?
Tell me.
When I was working in education, and one of the guys in the meeting, he kept going on about G&T, and that we really ought to get onto the G&T, and when we were going to do the G&T.
And
I put my hand up because I thought, what is this? And it was for the gifted and talented. But the G&T.
Well, I was thinking of gin and tonic. That's why.
So was I. So was I.
Yes. But because we, among our little group, we use these acronyms so often, we forget that other people don't know. And the problem is when we are listening to these talks or these specialists speaking, and we say, oh, he's using the acronym, should I know that? Maybe I shouldn't ask because I may be ignorant. And it makes us feel ignorant. Okay? But no, never feel minimized because you don't understand jargon. So here are several examples. I'm not going through all this text, but this for you to read at home. But here, I'm going through this one with you. The following sentences are expressed in typical scientific jargon. Translate this sentence into plain English. As a case in point, other authorities have proposed that slumbering canines are best left in a recumbent position. How does it sound in normal English? Do you know? Keith,
Yeah.
Let sleeping dogs lie.
Very good, very good. It has been posited that a high degree of inquisitive motivation proved lethal to a feline.
Curiosity killed the cat.
Good. There is a large body of experimental evidence which clearly indicates that a member of the genus Mus tend to engage in recreational activity while the feline is remote from the locale. You know what Mus means, the genus Mus? It's genus of mice.
The mice will play while the cat's away.
From time immemorial, it has been known that the ingestion of an apple, that is the plum fruit of any tree of genus Malus, said fruit being usually round in shape and red, yellow or greenish in color, on a diurnal basis will with absolute certainty keep a primary member of the healthcare establishment absent from one's local environment.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Very good, very good. Even with the most sophisticated experimental protocol, it is exceedingly unlikely that you can instill in a superannuated canine the capacity to perform novel feats of legerdemain. What is this one?
You can't teach old dogs new tricks.
You can't teach new tricks an old dog, yeah. A sedimentary conglomerate in motion down a declivity gains no addition of mossy material.
Rolling stone gathers no moss.
Good. The resultant experimental data indicate that there is no utility in belaboring and diseased equine. knows this one?
The dead horse, isn't it?
No point
No
in
No
flogging
point
the-
flogging a
point
dead
in-
horse.
Flogging
Flogging
a
a
dead
dead
horse, isn't it? No point in flogging a dead horse.
So I'm going to show you a video about jargon. Let's see if you can see it. Can you see? Oh, I have to go. I have to go there to the thing and show you. Where is the video? It's this one. I hope you can see it. I'm opening the video. I'm closing this PowerPoint. This is the last one. And now I'm going to share the video, the screen again. Share screen.
Hello, Steve. Thanks for coming. My name is John. Any questions before we start? Good. How does your company currently measure results in digital marketing?
Well, we look at the bigger picture and try to see what kind of ripple effect we go for the key influencers who are, at the end of the day, we want to create a halo effect around our brand recognition. And we try to fine tune engagements to get working on getting a real 360-degree view of the customer to
cross-segment synergies. Likes?
closed loop marketing for the classification of our brand. SEO.
Click-through rates?
Just make it go viral.
Okay. Did you like these ads? Okay. Now, this is the end of lesson 11. You have now 5 minutes to have a chat or do whatever you want to do. And then we do lesson 12. Sorry, that was lesson 10, then we do lesson 11. Where is it? Lesson 11. Lesson 11. Now it's language to influence others. Here is the cat who wants to get in again. And the cat, and Jessie. Now you stay here quiet, okay? Jessie. So I'm going to share screen again. Are you up to this or do you want a break? Okay, so let's put it on. So now what we are going, so we were looking at language design to impress, and now we are going to look at language design to influence, and this is going to take many lessons. When we talk about these types of language, we usually divide it in two types, like coercive language or suggestive language. Inside the coercive area, we have manipulation, indoctrination, brainwashing, nagging. Inside the suggestive, we have persuasion, propaganda, advertising, and suggestion. And there may be other types. These are just the ones that I came across. And I kind of found this divide between the types of language. The difference is that coercive language usually attempt to exert control over the people, and they also require obedience. Okay? It's different from, and here is the example. Manipulation means to manage or influence skillfully, especially in an unfair manner. And it's the word unfair here that is important, okay? Leading others to do what you want in an unscrupulous way. So unfair and unscrupulous is what identifies manipulation. Indoctrination means teaching someone to accept a set of beliefs without questioning them. And it's not only religious indoctrination, you have a lot of other types of school indoctrination, even science indoctrination, political, and so on. Then brainwashing, also known as mind control or menticide, is coercive persuasion, it's thought control, and it aims to re-educate or to reform the people by influencing their mind. You may know the story of, was it the First World War? I guess many prisoners, American prisoners of war, that were detained by, I don't know if it was the Chinese or the Japanese, I can't remember, the Japanese. And then the Japanese were teaching them how bad was America and democracy and capitalistic system. And they really turned them into believing and accepting and embracing those ideas. And they weren't really beating them up to do that. They were just kind of brainwashing them. So a person is brainwashed when she ends up changing her beliefs, her principles.
I think you're talking about Vietnam, Anna.
Was it? No, I think
Vietnam. It was in
Vietnam?
Vietnam. Yeah.
I can't remember. Well, I think I read it in it was Japan or Korea. It was the Second World War. Okay, maybe right. Well, it doesn't really matter where it was.
Or maybe Korea. Sorry,
I think it was Korea.
Korea. Sorry.
Yeah. So let's look at suggestive now. When you talk about suggestive influences, it depends more on the receptivity of the listener. Okay? Remember, we talked about that before. A person that is more or less critical, the variations are going to make the person accept better conspiracy theories, for example. And under suggestive, you have these persuasion, propaganda, advertising, and then suggestion by other means, like hypnotism. So, because it depends on the state of mind of others, then we can go from gullible to credulous to skeptics and ultra skeptics. And this, you know, a guy, an American comedian who called George Carlin, and he said, never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. Okay. And he said this many years ago, and it was a bit like a prediction of modern times. So here is a difference between gullibility and credulity. A person who's gullible, it's a bit a failure of social intelligence. So the person is easily tricked or manipulated into an ill-advised course of action. And it's very much a people who buy into snake oil and all sorts of stories that they are told. So, and they buy into things that are not supported by evidence. Credulity is a bit different. You may not be gullible, but sometimes you can be credulous. So it's a state of willingness to believe in one or many people or things in the absence of reasonable proof or knowledge. So credulity is not simply a belief in something that may be false. The subject of the belief may even be correct, but a credulous person will believe it without good evidence. So what we're going to look at now is persuasion. I'm going to concentrate on this one. The other ones, propaganda, advertising, and suggestion, will be part of part 3 of this course. But now I'm only going to concentrate on persuasion because I want to introduce the rhetorical devices. So, to persuade somebody means to prevail on a person to do something as by advising or urging, or to induce to believe by appealing to reason or understanding, to convince. So see that we can persuade very good critical reasoners if we use logic and critical reasoning. There is this book that you may be interested in reading, that I took some text from there, Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And one of the things he says, he comments about the importance of consistency. If you want to persuade somebody, it's very important that you're consistent in your story. And if you start identifying inconsistencies in the person's narrative, then we become more suspicious of the person's intentions, and then the person loses persuasiveness. Okay. So I just said that. So the more rational the person is, the more difficult it is to persuade her. But there are some persuasion factors that could naturally increase acceptance of arguments by someone who is more rational. For example, people who are rational could be persuaded by the fact that the person is likable, or is presenting her with things that the listener likes, okay? Or the person that is talking has authority, or you see the person as a person with authority. For example, many people may be persuaded by Richard Dawkins because they see him as a person with authority. Others may think that he has no authority, then they're not persuaded by him. Some things that are said that are more likely to gather social support, then a rational person may accept and embrace it. And also they say, well, more people seem to agree with that. Maybe I should agree as well. But you can see that these two here can also be fallacies. We'll discuss them later. So relying on these factors also can lead to irrational mistakes. Okay, so we have to be very careful when we want to decide whether we want to be persuaded or not. And this is because we are prone to shortcuts, that it's called heuristics. And these heuristics are what we call intuitive rules of thumb. And and it's a bit, remember when you talk about the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and it is a way of thinking fast. These are things we are born with, and we have a tendency to believe people that we like, or they are pretty, for example, or people that are famous. And this is a kind of an heuristics that we have embedded in our personalities. But the problem is that these shortcuts can be unreliable, okay? So what we're going to look at now are what are the tools of persuasion. And this is important for you if you work in advertising, because you can use it to persuade people, but they are also important for us to protect ourselves from being persuaded. And of course, language is the first thing and we already talked about that. You can use emotive language, humor, wishful thinking, appeal fallacies. We talk about them in lesson 12. The other thing is rhetoric. And rhetoric is the art or the skill of speaking or writing formally and effectively, especially as a way to persuade or influence people. And there is something missing here, without taking into consideration any truth of what we are saying. Okay. And then you have the visual. I mean, you know how visual can persuade people to buy things or believe things. But the subject of our lessons now is to focus on rhetoric. So what is rhetoric? The art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the exploitation of figures of speech and other compositional techniques. And we are going to look at several figures of speech. So it's designed to be persuasive, but look here, regarded as lacking in sincerity or meaningful content. This is one of the characteristics. So rhetorical discourse doesn't necessarily have to be riddled with fallacies or misinterpretations of truth, but it often is. Now I'm going to tell you, we're going back to the Greeks, and this is a bit like a bit of history. Where did all this start, the rhetoric? So around 490 BC, there was this philosopher called Protagoras, and he belonged to a Greek school called Sophism. Okay? And the philosophers who were sophists. And Sophism was actually a method of teaching. And it comes from the word Sophia, that is knowledge. And the Sophia, philos, Sophia means, philos means friend of, and Sophia means knowledge. So friend of knowledge, that's what a philosopher is. And but then from these words, Sophie, many other words came, like sophistry, okay? And sophistry means like sophisticated, to refer to intelligent or crafty people. That's what it meant in the old days. At the time, it was roughly equivalent to rhetoric. It was a way of using language. They started.
Sorry, Anna.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. In number 10, there's one before.
Yes.
Now after that, sorry, listen. You've got sophism written with an F, and I looked that up, and that is an alternative way of saying Sufism, which I don't think is what you want. So you need the PH in there another way.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will. I took this from a Portuguese book. You're right. So I'll change to PH.
Anna, on that word, you've also got intelligent or crafty people. Isn't that, aren't you just using emotive words there? Is it meant to be crafty people?
Yes. Well, these words are not mine. These words are coming from the book that explains what sophistry is.
Yeah, but they're using these words which you've taught us to recognize as influences, and I'm not sure sophisticated people are crafty.
This crafty here means power. That does not really crafty in masculine crafty, but is crafty in powerful. But this comes from a philosophy book, okay? So you have to understand that philosophy books, they speak.
Yes, as Peter said, I think as Peter, sly is a better word than crafty.
Yes.
Well, they mean crafty as sly. I think it's okay.
Yeah, because crafty people are. I think of crafty as arts and craft. You know, people who are crafty,
Yeah.
with their hands, they're creative.
Yeah.
I think it's okay though.
Okay, so let's go on. So here then, I have some slides. I'm not going to read it, but it just explains what's the importance of sophistry and rhetoric. And why was it important for the Greeks? I'm just going to summarize that. Because in those days, in Athens, there was a democracy. So people had to go to the forum to discuss their interests. And the ones who spoke the best had their policies approved by the rest of the people in the forum. But also the Greeks, the Athenians, they had a tendency to take people to court and sue people. I think that's where the Americans learned it from, I guess. But they sued people for everything. And in those days, they had to learn how to speak and argue in order to win the case. So what they did was they started paying these sophists to teach them how to speak properly and how to convince. And at the end of the day, there was a disregard for truth, and the emphasis was all on how well you could speak. Well, and then what happened was, so they were emotional. They used kind of emotional words. But then Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and the sophists lived at the same time as Socrates. Socrates didn't like them because he said they didn't take any consideration, any regard for the truth. They just wanted to move people by appealing to their emotion. And actually they saw rhetoric as poetry, as tools that were too often to use to manipulate others by appealing to emotion and omitting facts. Okay? So you can see that politics nowadays hasn't changed much. And the Greeks invented how to and that's why we say when politicians are experts in rhetoric. So Gorgias, actually, he was this philosopher who was a sophist, and he wanted to engage in knowledge and teach knowledge, and he was an orator. Okay, but then he started teaching the skills of oratory. Okay? And for example, everybody, I don't know here in UK, but maybe it's the same. When people study to be a priest in a seminar, one of the things they have to learn is rhetoric and oratory. They have to know how to convince people just by words. Okay? And what he said was, he could convince a patient that his medical advice is superior to a doctor's, even though he personally knows little to nothing about medical science. So Gorgias said that he could convince people. Okay? And we see that nowadays with all these health scams that have these juices, drink this orange juice, it will cure your cancer, and things like that. And so you have people who believe or don't have vaccines. And so you read stuff on the internet and you believe them because they have a kind of rhetoric that is more convincing than the rhetoric or the information that is provided by the doctors. And this is the doctors and the scientists to blame, because they lack in communicating with words that the majority of people can understand. They live in their clouds, and rarely there is an intermingling of popular science. So what Gorgias mentioned was that he was referring to the sophists' ability to be a charlatan, a false expert who people take too seriously. For example, he could trick people into buying a product for the wrong reasons, just like a snake oil salesman. Snake oil salesmen sell medicine that actually doesn't work. Okay. Now, this is important. Manipulative argument techniques are known as fallacies or sophisms. Okay. And again, what I just told you, Socrates saw sophistry and rhetoric as being manipulative. He thought we should rely on the best arguments and expertise rather than the non-rational forms of persuasion that rhetoric was often using. So nowadays, when you talk about sophistry, we think about manipulation. Okay, then there is also the question, it's a question of ethics. So it's obvious that Socrates didn't like the sophists, Aristotle didn't like them either, and then Aristotle wrote a book called Rhetoric. So kind of saying what should be the real rhetoric, okay? And you can see here words that we have nowadays that come from sophos, that means clever or not, and nowadays they don't mean that. So you have sophism, that is a deceptive argument similar to a fallacy. But while the fallacy can be a simple error, we can make errors when we are talking, a sophism aims to deceive, okay, has a purpose. There's a difference between fallacy. So it looks correct in appearance, but it is invalid and also unsound. Okay. Sophistry, it's something that we also use nowadays. It's roughly equivalent to the art of persuasion, but nowadays is also perceived as manipulative rhetoric. And then we have the word sophisticated, that also comes from sophism. That means he uses complex and convoluted language. A person who's sophisticated knows a lot of many difficult and complex words. It is not necessarily negative, sophisticated. So what he wrote in that book on rhetoric, and now what Aristotle said was that there were three elements that were essential to philosophy. That was logic, dialectic, and rhetoric. But he didn't assume rhetoric as sophistry. Okay? So for Aristotle, rhetoric is a tool for practical debate. It is a means for persuading a general audience using probable knowledge to resolve practical issues. And here is the difference, probable, okay? And the word, you have evidence to support it. When I was a teenager, there was a revolution in my country, and 74, and I was a member of the socialist youth, and I was kind of helping in the first elections, and I felt very engaged, as everybody in their 16 feel like. And one of the things that they were always saying was talking about materialismo dialético, dialectic materialism. And I hadn't a clue what this thing meant, but everybody was using this word in comícios, or general gatherings, political gatherings. And this is something that comes from Karl Marx. And I finally understood what dialectic means once we start having Wikipedia. And dialectic is a tool for philosophical debate. It is a means for skilled audience to test probable knowledge in order to learn. But in those days, when we were talking to the people in the villages and asking them to vote on us, we said, well, you have to vote on us because we are the followers of dialectic materialism. And we knew that nobody understood what the heck it meant, but it sounded good. And at the time, I didn't have a clue what rhetoric and sophistry was, and was basically what I was doing. We grow up and get wiser. That's the hope. So career politicians are actually trained in rhetoric, okay? And probably they use more sophistry than rhetoric. So next time when you're listening to their discourses, you will identify some rhetorical devices that I'm going to teach you. There is this interesting book, The Rhetoric of Political Leadership, Logic and Emotion in Public Discourse, that I haven't bought yet because it's expensive. And when I have a birthday, maybe I'll get it. And this is taken from that book from, I downloaded the sample, and it said, it is a fact that even brief impressions may have measurable influence on behavior. You know that usually the first 5 minutes make an impression of a person. The operation of such influences may occur below the threshold of consciousness. So if you look at the person, how the person is dressed, you may immediately make a judgment about this person, even before the person opens her mouth. So the positive and negative impressions made by use of rhetorical devices, while they may sometimes seem trivial, can have powerful and long-lasting effects. And here it is, you have Anna shouting, dialectic materialism is the way to go, when nobody knew what that meant, but it sounded good. Okay? And then they said,
Anna, can we ask what is below the threshold of consciousness? If it's below the threshold of consciousness, you wouldn't receive it, I would have thought.
No, it's subconscious. So there are lots of information that you receive, but you're not aware that the thing is getting into your memory and your mind. And for example, that's why the way we dress is so important. For example, when I lived in Denmark, the Danes said, what you dress is not important. What is important is what is inside you, the person that you are. And the Danes are perhaps the worst dressed people in the European Union, or they were in those days. And then I realized that actually the way I presented myself to people who didn't know me created in them an opinion of me. Because I used to dress as a Portuguese girl, and the Danes start saying that I was vain because I dressed up to go to university. And all teachers in Portugal dress up to go to the classes, to give lectures and so on. And so I became dressing down. And when I went to Portugal, my mother was always nagging me because I was so badly dressed. And I was dressed the Danish way. And so I became aware that the way we present ourselves, it's very important for the others to make opinions of us. Okay? And the way you yourselves, you might have experienced individuals with certain accents in the UK that they may come across as erudite or as simple-minded. And especially people who don't say the T's to me, they say, well, I can't remember any word with a T now, T in the middle, but they don't say the T's, you know. And I find it a bit uncultured, people who speak English without actually saying the T. Politicians, for example, instead of saying politicians, say politicians or police. And I find it a bit uncultured. And maybe the person is intelligent, but it just goes subconsciously. Okay, so.
Anna.
Yeah.
Sorry to be such a fusspot, but a psychological point about rhetoric, you've got an extra H in there.
Where?
A psychological point about rhetoric?
Yes.
There's an extra H in the way you typed it. After about.
Ah, okay, I did. Yes, yes. Yeah, I will change. Thank you.
And personally, I like creative spelling. I mean, you know, I usually, when I write something, it's pretty terrible. But because it's facing me here, you know, I happen to see
Yeah,
it.
but that's okay. Could you remind me next time when you read it, say, on slides number something. Okay. Now, logical arguments. So rhetoric is not necessarily logical, okay? So you know what the logical argument is by now, okay? And I don't need to be explaining it to you. But the rhetorical argument makes an attempt to persuade and not necessarily using logic, not necessarily using counter evidence, okay? And it can go in multiple directions. So then you can read this when you're studying. What I want to show you now is what are the rhetorical devices that people use. So there are two issues, two big areas in rhetoric. You have rhetorical devices and rhetorical operations. The devices are techniques that people use to convince others, okay? So often they are emotional, for example, you see the politicians when they start speaking and then they look at somebody and they point, I can see you. It can be anyone in the crowd, but oh, he's pointing at me. And so this is also a behavioral rhetorical device when they do like this. Trump is always doing like that. And there are also ways how people use their hands. Okay? If they open their arms, I'm embracing all of you. So these are all subconscious rhetorical devices. So they all operate at the emotional level. But rhetorical operations are figures of speech. And the figures of speech that I'm going to teach you later are alliterations, for example, everything that starts with the same consonant. Well, 3 or 4 words that start with the same consonant. Capable, cooperative, and and cozy. So he is capable, cooperative, and cozy. And so the CCC, and usually things comes in groups of 3, okay? And when I'm writing, sometimes I remember 2 words, and I need to find a 3rd word that is similar to make it to make it look nice. So sibilant is like a snake. You have this sound in zeugma, similes, euphemisms, oxymorons, humor. All these are rhetorical operations. I like oxymoron because I always think of the word a moron that is lacking oxygen, but it's not. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about in the next lesson, is the differences between rhetorical devices and rhetorical operations. And lesson 12, if you download it, is the one with the 156 slides, but is divided in 3 sections. And I put all the rhetorical devices that I could come across, because some people like lists. And of course, you don't have to know them all, but you can use them as guides to try to understand when you're listening to politicians speaking, which devices they are using. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to open to questions and comments. So what did we learn today?
Well, sorry, from the 150 you're going to give us, can you just tell us the top 3?
You're curious. I can show
Just
you.
the ones that are most useful or used most. I don't need 150, that's for sure.
No, well, you'll come across them because once you start reading them, oh yeah, oh that's interesting. What about the other one? So this is, let me see, slideshow. Actually, some of them you already know. In critical thinking 1, I taught you about appeal to emotion. I also taught you about a dominant, and then I'm going to teach you about other devices. So inside appeals, remember that we have appeal to emotion, appeal to authority, and appeals to the mind. And then you remember appeals to emotion are things like appeal to tradition, appeal to popularity, everybody does it, we already appeal to pity. So I ask you to believe that my argument is true and to side with me because I want you to feel pity for me. So all these, if you just read this list, you can think of what they are. And basically, then I give you examples. To appeal to authority, this is important for you, okay? Notice the difference between appeal to unqualified authority and appeal to anonymous authority and false attribution. Appeal to authority is okay. You can appeal to a scientist when he's telling us about COVID. But if you say that Donald Trump tells me that using I don't know what the name, is good to treat COVID, it's an appeal to unqualified authority. Okay? So he has no qualifications to talk about epidemiology. And the same with anonymous authority. And how many times do we see texts that say, studies found that, scientists say that, it is generally known that, and this is appeal to anonymous authority. And then you have false attribution. That is, somebody said that, but actually he didn't. And then you have appeals to the mind, there's appeal to common practice. We usually do that. Why shouldn't we do it again? Appeal to ignorance, you remember that one about you cannot prove a negative. That's about the ghosts, because we don't know if ghosts don't exist, therefore they exist. Incredulity, minor novelty. So these are rhetorical devices based on appeals. These are just some examples from appeals to emotion, flattery. I'm going to speak a lot about this one because we talked about the naturalistic fallacy and we're going to talk about it again. Appeal to wishful thinking, for example. That's very much what Trump people do. Appeal to personal circumstances, for example. I should not pay taxes because I'm a traveler. But then you can argue, say, well, but you get all the benefits without paying taxes. So because your personal circumstances being a traveler is not a good argument. You have to give a stronger argument to support why you don't pay taxes.
Especially as they're driving on the road that needs taxes to make.
Yes, yes. And now the climate change is a hoax. I know that because I'm very accomplished. Okay, so appeal to accomplishment. We will discuss appeal to equality in detail. I'm not going to discuss it now. Appeal to unqualified authority. This Einstein said something about abortion, but then Einstein is not qualified. Appeal to anonymous authority. A false attribution. Abraham Lincoln says, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Okay. And then we're going to discuss in depth appeal to ancient wisdom. People think just because it's old, it's good. And here are some examples that I'm going to talk about. Then appeals to the mind, for example, appeal to popular belief. Most of the people in the world are Christian, therefore Christianity is the only true religion, because it's a popular belief. Okay? And then you have ad hominem. You may remember these ones: abusive, circumstantial, and to quoque. And then the other rhetorical devices are downplayers, false dilemmas, complex questions, loaded questions, intonation, innuendo, euphemism, stereotypes, weasel. It is an American thing. Downplayers. It's already there. Proof surrogates, rhetorical questions. Da, 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 da. Well,
Some
again,
of this sounds like jargon.
yeah, but then for the verbosity, we already talked about verbosity. That is a rhetorical device. And so I give you several examples. False dilemmas are very used by politicians. They're very much used. You either, America, love it or leave it. And it's either this or the other, as if there was no halfway. I like this Terry Pratchett in this book, Diggers. Grima said, we have two choices. We can run or we hide. And they said, which shall we do? She said, we shall fight. So that's actually, that was a false dilemma. Okay. Then you have a complex question. And then we talk about innuendo, assumptions, suppositions, remember that stuff, Weaslers, hyperbole, or the Portuguese use this very much. I don't know if it is common in English, but we say, oh, I waited an eternity for you. Where have you been when 5 minutes over the time? I have millions of cousins, and means I have many. But we Portuguese know that this is not corresponding to the truth. But the Danes don't use hyperbole very much in their language. So when I use hyperbole, the Danes took it as being true, and they thought I was a liar. And I couldn't really understand how could they believe that I had 1 million cousins, because it was obvious that I didn't 1 million cousins. So you can see how culture also differs. We'll look at misleading visuals. Look at this one here. This is results by party, some questionnaire that they did, doesn't matter. But then what you see here is Democrats seem to be much higher than Republicans and independents. But in fact, they start on 53. But if you start on 0, there's not much of a difference. So if you show this graph, you actually mislead the people to believe that the Democrats are more in whatever it is that they answer. Then we have tautologies, pleonasms, around circles, for example. A free gift. I'm always so annoyed with a free gift. If it is a gift, it's free. You don't need to say that it is a free gift. Have you ever paid for a gift? So at 7 a.m. in the morning, repeat it again, things like that. These are pleonasms.
And I think this is more than 3.
Look at this one in Asda. Permanently low prices forever. So permanently is forever, isn't it? Yeah. Please prepay in advance. Okay. And then I have some examples here. The cheapest, first introduced. So if it was introduced, it was first. So you don't need to still first introduced. Short summary. A summary is short. So although some summaries are long, but these are examples that we can discuss. Faster speed, added bonus. A bonus is something that is added. And then the oxymorons, I like them. Burning it's like a self-canceling expression. For example, this is an accurate stereotype. Well, if it is a stereotype, it's not accurate. Okay? Or I'm certainly unsure. So if you're unsure, you're not certain. A family vacation. This is humorous. If it's a family, it's not a vacation. Okay, you're actually, especially if you have children with you. Objective parent. There's no such thing as objective parents. So this is just to make you laugh. But here you have another Microsoft Works working vacation. So it's a vacation. It's not supposed to be work. Enormously small. Ethical hackers. Have you heard of this one? So Christian evolutionist in creation science. So we can discuss. And then we have double speak. That is what the politicians do. Again, we have verbosity. That, and then we have the pathetic fallacy. Do you remember Herbie? This American, my brother was 5, he loved it. And if you know the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, those of you who are not British, these are some, was a radio program. And there is this computer, this robot that is always depressed, okay? So it's giving human feelings to machines. It was called Marvin. And we talked about this already, but it's also part of the. So what we're going to do now with rhetorical devices is a lot of repetition of what we already talked about, but it's just to make you aware that these ways of speaking are very much part of rhetoric. Okay.
Can I be pedantic like Peter for a minute? I think ethical hacker is now accepted as not an oxymoron anymore. They're called white hats, and it's not an oxymoron anymore.
A white hat?
Yeah.
White, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Or
So you
also
would say-
something about ruins that was, which is a reason, I didn't think it was an oxymoron. There are ruins that are bad and there are ruins that are not too bad. And
Yeah.
there was a word there that said that. And I don't think that's an oxymoron.
Yes, depends. I mean, the thing alone, we are taking it out of context. Okay. But there are situations where these things are not oxymorons, but in other situations are oxymorons. So this is not science. Again, it varies. We have to see what happens. So I have a message from Keith here. Keith, to everyone, explain is to make plain. It's about explanation and the other one. What is the other one, Keith? I forgot.
Explicate, it's there.
Explicate, yeah. Yes, explicate. He went. Okay, I'm going to stop recording